Hello and welcome to PS on Air, the meeting place for contributors to Project Syndicate and the newspapers that publish their articles. My name is John Andrews, a contributor to Project Syndicate myself, and I'm delighted to welcome Nina Khrushcheva, a professor at a new school in New York and an expert on many things, but in particular Russia. With us we have Christa Paris from the Estonian newspaper Eesti Päevaleht and Arnold Brovers from the Dutch newspaper Die Volkskrant. Nina, let me start. Before we get on to Russia, let's talk a tiny bit about President Trump. Is he turning America into a very illiberal country? I mean, the war with Mexico, threatening to take money away from the United Nations, banning various immigrants, etc.
Well, it seems like it, although he's not entirely original in this kind of development, because we've seen this developments already in Europe and elsewhere. The time for illiberal democracy when those, and I call them not always liberal Democrats, but also autocratic Democrats, because or democratic autocrats, the people who are democratically elected, but then say we are going to protect the nation.
Like Viktor Orban in
Hungary. Viktor Orban in Hungary, like Erdogan, President Erdogan in Turkey, like Vladimir Putin himself. So we've seen this development for the last decade, I think, all around the world. I think the difference with America is that Americans thought it was not an American phenomenon, it was just elsewhere. And now we're seeing that that's not the case, that America is part of the world after all.
Christa, do you have a question for Nina on this, or post-truth America?
If you're talking to, let's say, NATO officials, then they are implying that actually there is a war going on. We still don't know it, but it has started as a hybrid warfare, we can say, through attacks on free press, attacks on truth, and so on. What is the appeal of Mr. Putin's message that it is even heard in such anti-Russian places like Poland?
Putin is just the kind of one of the beginners of this kind of trend. The trend began after September 11th, after 2001. And in fact, I think Putin is not the origins of this trend. In fact, I would say that Dick Cheney, the former vice president of the United States, is the one who started this kind of development, saying we were attacked and therefore we have the right to act unilaterally. We can harass journalists and newspapers that try to report the truth, not because this is not the truth that we consider the right one.
Now we are seeing alternative facts.
But you are right, exactly. Well, I mean, I think at the time in the 2000s, the alternative facts were different, but certainly the truth was modeled under into a certain kind of truthfulness or truish information. And so Putin actually picked up on that, because Russia is always as we remember in the Cold War, is always in competition with the United States. And so Putin essentially said, well, if America can do it, so can I. And I think we've seen the development of the world.
Yeah, if I may, I wonder if we're not giving a great gift to authoritarian leaders worldwide if we start calling America an illiberal democracy because a nationalist won the democratic elections. If we start confusing all those terms, isn't that the greatest gift we could do to countries and to leaders who actually are not democratic?
Yes and no, because I also think since we talk about truth, we do have to call things the way they are. And Trump was democratically elected leader, but he's, at least what he has shown, I mean, he's been on the job for only a week, but he's shown that he is in favor of various illiberal acts, which he thinks are part of the new democracy that he's going to establish. So yes, it is true. We are going to give everybody else a possibility to act this way. But I think America already did this. I mean, the fact that they elected.
We have the idea of checks and balances in the American system. Now you do have a Republican-controlled Senate now, a Republican-controlled Congress and a lot of Republican governors. So
And if we look at what Trump does, I mean, I was shocked by the amount of decrees that he has issued in the first 5 minutes. I actually remember I was talking to my Chinese colleagues, I mean, people who analyze China, and they say, "Oh my God, it looks so and sounds so familiar." The same goes for me as a Russian. When Boris Yeltsin became Russian president in 1991, it was kind of the same thing. I mean, he ruled by decree because he kept saying, "Well, I cannot trust anybody, just myself." So I agree with you, but I also think that it's not that the world is going to take bad cues. It's already Trump already gave those cues to the world.
What's your feeling on this?
Well, my feeling is that we need to keep a clear distinction between different political systems. If you look, for instance, at Russia, you could see that Mr. Putin has sort of gotten rid of all political opposition effectively. So I think there's a really fundamental difference with the way that the United States is run. And I'm simply worried that if we sort of put everything in the same big soup, that we're exactly doing what, for instance, Russia Today or Russian experts analyzing the world want us to do. This is my
Can I
worry.
respond?
Yes,
May
please,
I respond? I don't think we are, because as I said, I mean, as we discussed, Trump has been on a job only for a week. So we are only thinking of what he said, what does it mean in other systems. When Putin started, there was a system, at least in more than ever Russia had, the system of checks and balances. I mean, they did call it managed democracy, vertical democracy. Now it's much less democracy, much more vertical or managed. I mean, for people like us who analyzed Putin or KGB or other Russian leaders, even little evidence of strength was suspicious. But for a long, long time, at least for almost 6, 7, 8, even 8 years, it seemed like it was a reasonably democratic environment, although, of course, with Russian characteristics. So I think we're just talking about and I think we're talking more about the time frame than we're talking about the definition.
Krista, do you have views on
Yes,
that?
exactly. But I mean, if you're saying a time frame, it sounds very dangerous to me because, Mr. Trump has taken on the same very checks and balances, one of the main pillars of it. It's a free media, where he has basically said that he's at war with media. There were already arrests on the inauguration day of journalists. It all sounds so similar. How vulnerable is America to some kind of soft authoritarianism? I don't think about having Putin 2.0 right now, but something like that.
And I think to your point is that we do know, unless something horrible happens, Trump is there for 4 years. If we're very unlucky, he's there for 8 years. Putin has been around for 17 years, and that's the difference. Because ultimately they go away. In our system,
if, let's say, Russia is kind of on offensive, that especially in Estonia, in a small country next to the border, we're quite afraid of all kind of Russian moves. But what is actually the aim of Russia? There's also a talk of building up military muscles, of increasing all the time military budget. But then again, it's still a weak country militarily if you compare it to NATO. What is like the ends of Mr. Putin's will?
but Russia is a weak country. It is a weak country generally, not just in military terms, but in, say, let's talk about information. Let's talk about civil society. I mean, it is a country that is very weak, and that's why it has very weak liberties, because that's why it always wants a Tsar or Putin, precisely because it feels that if somebody in the center controls the system, then you can convince everybody that the system is strong. But the system has never been strong. And I think the ambition is that Russia always wants to be great. It wants to be greater than anybody else. It wants to keep its 11 time zones.
Krista, from your point of view, in Estonia, and when you look at the hybrid warfare that Putin has deployed, for example, Eastern Ukraine, and then if you look also at what Trump has said about NATO, I mean, you must feel slightly nervous.
Well,
Or
yes.
a lot nervous.
We knew that there was one unpredictability that is in Kremlin and one predictability that is NATO. Currently, this other pillar has just ceased to be. And, well, now our diplomats are trying eagerly to find any kind of ways to Mr. Trump at all, because we don't have any contacts with him. And, yes, what most feels most threatening are hints that he might want to carve up some kind of pacts in, let's say, 1939 style with Russia or other big powers.
Let me just ask Arnott, I mean, when you look at this situation, what do you feel?
Well, I actually have one follow-up question on this illiberal democracy thing. You made a very interesting argument recently that Mr. Putin is actually not out to undermine a liberal democracy in the West, but that he's simply pursuing his country's interests, and that he is exposing double standards in the West to do that. I thought that was interesting because it's original. Most people simply assume that he has some huge conspiracy going on to undermine democracy in the entire world. So I'd like to ask you about that in connection with the fact that you wrote that in America there was some sort of a hysterical reaction to Russian involvement in the election, the American elections.
I wasn't exactly saying that he was not to undermine to undermine liberal democracy. He is at this point now. But what I was saying is that originally, now he's saying, well, you didn't take me into your liberal democratic club, and therefore I'm going to develop my own parallel world order because I was not admitted into mine, into yours. So that was my argument. I actually think that taking 17 years, by now he's totally at that. He is undermining liberal democracy because in his view, liberal democracy is something that discredited itself. It discredited itself with the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, with the NSA spying, with the Arab Spring, with the Syrian war and whatnot. And so that's what he is saying, is that, fine, you thought I was bad, but look at you, you're also bad. And he's exposing this kind of hypocrisies. As we know, I mean, the West has quite a bit.
Yeah.
And so I think that was his original idea. I mean, it's not a defense of Putin in any way. I mean, and that original idea, as a lot of people would argue, is a very KGB-driven. Yes, but I think when one understands this, one probably should refrain from hysterical reaction to Putin, but instead look at him and find out what kind of diplomatic relationship one can have to stop him, or at least deal with him on a war in a way that the world can benefit from.
Even there are now people again talking about Stefan Zweig's books about yesterday's world and so on. It all feels so familiar. At the same time, we want to believe that it just cannot be happening. What are the dangers or actually probabilities of Russia and US carving up some big pact, maybe against China, maybe against Islamic State, and then just pawns like Estonia will be sacrificed?
Well, I think there are great probabilities, and Donald Trump already promised that there are probabilities that we're going to be great friends. I mean, we in America are going to be great friends with Putin over ISIS, and we are going to, if the Russians want to take care of it, let them take care of it. There is a school of thought, especially in Russia right now, where I just came from Moscow, that Putin will be allowed back into the Western camp. Trump's Western camp is an oxymoron in terms, but let's just say Western camp of Donald Trump, because Putin is going to give up his relationship with China, or at least kind of tone them down, because Trump is very anti-Chinese, at least so he has been saying. So that would allow Putin to become part of G8 again. And I think it is a great danger for a lot of countries, so the Baltics certainly. What will be the fate of Ukraine? What will be the fate of Moldova and all these other countries that were used to comprise the Soviet space. I don't know exactly which way it can go, because I think also as much as important as history is as a point of reference, we cannot exactly say it's going to be exactly like the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact of 1939. I don't think we can say that. But certainly, I'm very afraid for the world.
I was wondering how you see this talk of some sort of a civilizational alliance, which has been proposed from Moscow, of course, already for quite some time, saying that you guys in the West, you got it all wrong, because we're actually on the same side against Islamic terrorism and extremism, and we should be fighting it together. There are actually a couple of leaders in the world elsewhere who might join such an alliance, and then you get a whole different sort of geostrategic setup. Do you see that happening?
In a bit. I mean, I think this whole civilizational argument that is very big, I mean, when you ask what Putin wants, I mean, that whole civilization argument is very big for Putin. He keeps saying that it's, when we, now in the West, clearly we're not part of the West.
Samuel Huntington.
Right, he did, and he said, well, that's not the end of history, that's the end of your history. If you don't want me in your history, I'm going to make my own, which he's making, and so we're having this whole civilizational debate, and his bad relationship with Erdogan originally and now better are the ones that are actually sort of the Sultan versus the Tsar relationship. So I think there is a civilizational debate, at least. And in fact, Putin also, because not only size that matters for Putin, also his historical destiny is also very important. And in some ways, he's leading, I mean, as much as he says he's leading that civilizational battle, because the Tsars before him was leading this kind of battle exactly. Sort of, so Russia was always a buffer between Europe and Asia, so to speak. And so they do that.
Of course, we have practical matters. The Russian economy is really not doing well, and I think one of the highest on the list of desirables in Moscow is to get rid of those sanctions, and this is what I expect Mr. Putin to really be after in the short term. So that's going to put Europe in a difficult spot, and it's going to put Angela Merkel in a difficult spot. How do you see her and how do you see Europe reacting to this? Because one of the sort of traditional fears in European diplomacy is to have the United States and Russia dealing with each other over the heads of the Europeans and deciding what's good for everybody.
Now Russia got used to sanctions. Yes, they want it out, but they actually can survive them, because if you read the Russian press, all of it is phrased in militaristic terms. And when Russia is at war, and you mentioned that Russia is in this asymmetrical war, or some is more symmetrical than others, some other places more symmetrical than others, the Russians feel that if you are at war, you actually can survive a lot of things. So they would want sanctions lifted, but they can get used to them, or they got used to them.
Christo, I think you may have a question on Putin's future.
Well, basically, the main idea is that Putin is mortal, and we have seen quite many signs, also some shifts in the administration, putting, for example, Anton Vaino instead of Sergei Ivanov and so on, which some analysts interpret as preparations to leave office and hand over to someone who knows to whom. And I mean, do you see signs that Putin is already playing a long-term game, how to go into the history as the Tsar that gave up the throne voluntarily?
Hey, is he mortal, really? His changing of the guard, actually, the last year or so, 2 years, seems more like a vampire move. Is that when, the vampire runs out of life cycle, he has to drink blood, the fresh blood. And so exactly what he's doing, and, those new positions that are supposedly more liberal, that more liberal people take them than the people before, is sort of window dressing or vampire drinking blood of those who's like, oh, look, we have a Kiriyenko now, Sergei Kiriyenko, once a liberal man, who is now part of my administration, and that's supposed to make you feel very, very confident that I'm going to leave power. I don't believe, nobody leaves power in the 17th year of power. If he had a chance to get out, he got out in 2008. He came back in 2012. He didn't have to come back, but he did.
Unfortunately, we need to finish the session, but let me give you a final question and actually quote, I think it was Enoch Powell, a British politician, who said, all political careers end in failure. How is Putin's career going to end and when?
Putin needs to stay. He's going to stay. He plans to stay until 2024. The Constitution allows him. And then he'll find another way. Unless he's dead, he'll find another way to stay something. Well, or they would say, you know what, the world, we're in such danger because of NATO that we, or Brexit or something, that we actually need to have our Putin because he's going to protect us. He needs to die in the Kremlin, or he's dead. He is dead otherwise.
But
So
on
we will have another Brezhnev.
We will have another Brezhnev.
On that note, Nina Khrushcheva, thank you
Thank
very
you.
much for being with us on PS on Air. Thank you so much.
you.
And thank you also, Arnold and Krista.
Thank you.